Good morning. It's December 27th. I know that because yesterday was my birthday. So I know one date in the calendar. Um, this is my Sunday school class. We are in the book of Genesis. We're in Genesis chapter 20. Um, in the last chapter, um, God went down to Sodom and Gomorrah and got Lot out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he destroys it, right? He warns them. Angels go down there, do stuff. People of Sodom care, they're even more excited. Ooh, there are angels here. We're going to really do something. So Lot goes and hides in a cave, and we see four cities destroyed, lava, volcano. And listen, when they've dug in that area and discovered in old cities and some sort of volcanic activity that happened, although there was no volcano present. But God left the little remnants there so people could find it thousands of years later and go, this really did happen. And it really did happen. Okay. The fifth city, Lot thought he was going to go to, but when he got there, people were scary. So he went and lived in a cave instead of going with Abraham. And his daughters decided that they needed to have children. And so they get their father drunk and they have kids through their father, which is Moab and Ben Ami, and Moab was the father of the Moabites, and Ami was uh, father of the Ammonites. Okay, so that was chapter 19. Abraham saw the whole thing, sees the city destroyed. I guess he can only hope that Lot escaped because Lot didn't come back to him. So hopefully Lot got out of there. So what does Abraham do? Probably what anybody would do. In Genesis chapter 20, verse 1, it says, and Abraham journeyed from there to the south. So Abraham got out of there. Uh, Maybe it was the smell of sulfur or lava. I mean, he just saw four cities destroyed. He says, I think I need to leave here for a while. And he dwelt between Kadesh and Shur. So that's southern Israel and northern Africa, right, on the way to Egypt. So he dealt right in between there in a place called Gerar, which is modern day Palestine today. So he's in Palestine. Um, at the time, the Philistines lived there, and the Jewish people were not a people yet. It was just Abraham and his wife, right? Um, they weren't attacking the Philistines. There was no enmity between them at the time. 400 years later, it becomes a problem. But right now it's not. Okay, so he's in Gerar, which is modern day Palestine. And verse 2 says, now Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. This is his story that he's giving. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. So here's where we are again. I don't know if you recall in Genesis chapter 12, verse 14, when Abraham went down to Egypt, it says, so it was when Abraham came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And the same thing had happened. Uh, Abraham had said, she's my sister. Okay. So we're going to look at why he did this again. It's kind of interesting because it's 25 years later and he's done the same sort of thing. Even though when he went down to Pharaoh the last time, it turned out that he didn't have to do that. Pharaoh said, no, you didn't have to say she was your sister. Found out this was his wife, and Pharaoh didn't kill Abraham. But it's 25 years later, and he's doing the exact same thing. So there's some clues in this chapter as to why. So, but here's what Abimelech is doing. It's not that, because Sarah's now 90 something, so she's not as attractive as she was maybe when she was 65. I don't know. It was that this nomad sheik had come in, because don't forget, Abraham has 300 or 400 servants, and they all have kids, and he has cattle, and he's a prince as far as King Gahar is concerned. He's showing up with this huge entourage, and he wants an alliance. And the way you would make an alliance with another country so that they would not attack you is to, okay, I'll marry your sister, or I'll marry your daughter, or your son will marry my daughter, that sort of thing. So that's why they take Sarah, and he adds her to his harem. He's got a harem, he's got lots of wives, and he adds her to his harem, and Abraham says, yeah, she's my sister. Okay. Genesis chapter 20, verse 3. But God, and this is Elohim, and the writer of Genesis is very specific when he uses the term Elohim and when he uses the term Jehovah. Elohim is the name of just general name of God, but Jehovah means the covenant God. So that we've got a deal. So whenever he would use the term Jehovah, he's talking about God has made a promise to Abraham or whoever it is, and so therefore he has to keep his promise. So he refers to him as Elohim, meaning this is not the Jehovah relationship. This is just God in general. And God does have a contract with everybody. There was a contract he made in Eden with the whole earth, with everybody, to subdue the earth and multiply and to take care of it. We should be custodians of the earth and to take care of it. Then there was a Noah covenant that he made with everybody. That's what the rainbow means. He says, don't murder and love God, and I will not destroy the earth with flood. And here's my sign. And that covenant was with everybody. So God has made a covenant with everybody on earth, but there's a specific covenant he makes with Abraham. And whenever the writer of Genesis is referring to that, then he calls him Jehovah. But so this is Elohim, and Elohim has a contract with everybody, right? So it says, but God, Elohim, came to Abimelech in a dream by night. So even though he wasn't Jewish, this is still someone that God has created. Everybody on earth, God has created everybody on earth and concerned, and he speaks to everybody. He speaks to everybody. Okay. So God came to Abimelech in a dream by night. Now there are two ways that God speaks in Genesis, either by dream or by vision. He seems to speak to his chosen people in a vision. He spoke to Abraham in a vision. He spoke to Jacob in a vision. He speaks to all of them in a vision, which means you actually kind of see his presence while you are awake. But in a dream, God likes to speak to people, and that's how he would speak to just the regular folk. For example, in Genesis chapter 41, we haven't gotten there yet, but God spoke to Pharaoh. It says that it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by a river, and God showed him stuff. So God spoke to Pharaoh in a dream. This is when Moses went down there. In Daniel chapter 4, verse 5, it says, I saw a dream which made me afraid. This is Nebuchadnezzar. He's the king of the Babylonians. And the thoughts in my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. And so he had a dream. So God speaks to everybody. But in Genesis specifically, and the first 5 books of the Bible, he'll often speak to the heathen, the regular folk, the Gentiles, in a dream. Okay, so he's speaking to Abimelech in a dream. Genesis chapter 20, verse 3, the second part says, and he said to him, indeed, you are a dead man, because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Now, the better translation would be, indeed, you are dying. You are dying because of the woman which you have taken, for she is a man's wife. This means that the action you are taking is hurting you, is killing you. When God tells us not to do something, it's because that thing that we're thinking is okay to do is leading towards our death. It's killing us. Everything that God tells us to do brings us life, and the things that we choose to do on our own start to kill us. So once we get to that 15th donut in one sitting, now you've gone. God has told you to stop at 5, but you said, no, I'm gonna keep going. And the reason God is telling you stop at 5 donuts is because now you're starting to kill yourself slowly. So that's just an example of him coming to Abimelech and saying, you're dying. what you are doing is dying because this is killing you because this man is not, this woman is another man's wife. Okay, in Genesis chapter 20, verse 4, but Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord Adonai, not Jehovah, will you slay a righteous nation also? So he knew what had happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. How could anybody miss it? 4 cities had just melted away. So he knew that, but everybody knew what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah and how they treated people and murdered people and were horrible to the poor. So he's saying our nation is basically righteous. So if whatever God you are that you're speaking to me, you're probably the one that got upset with Sodom and Gomorrah, but we're not evil like they are. So you're going to slay all of us, him thinking that his actions were going to infect the whole nation. So he's pleading his case. In verse 5, he says, did he not say to me, she is my sister? And even she herself said, he is my brother. And in the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. So I wasn't trying to go against you, or I thought this was your sister. I thought who it was. Now, so here's what's interesting. A wrong thing is a wrong thing, whether you know it's wrong or not. But God does not judge you the same way when you don't know it's wrong, right? But it's still hurting you. That's why it's wrong. It's hurting you. And so God's obligated to warn you, and he does. He sends us warnings, even whether we know God or not. That's the good part. But there's still consequences for our actions, but their consequences are steeper when you're also defying God on purpose, like you know that you're not supposed to do that. So there's a difference between when you know you're not supposed to do it and you do it, and when you had no idea but you still did it. There are still consequences, but they're much fewer. In fact, Jesus in a parable in Luke chapter 12 talked about the servant whose master was far away and he had no idea when he was coming back. So he was acting up. He started beating the servants and doing all stuff like that. And he didn't know that the master was just about to show up, and he gets in trouble. So it says in verse 47 of Luke chapter 12, it says, and that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself or do according to his will shall be beaten with many stripes. So you knew what the master told you to do, but you thought, oh, he's delayed in coming, I'm going to act up. So this person is doing it willfully, right? So he says he'll be beaten with many stripes.
That's how we got zebras.
That's how we got zebra. They got beaten with many stripes. Yeah. Verse 48 says, but he who did not know, yet committed things deserving of stripes, shall be beaten with a few. So the other one gets many, says, but he who did not know, there's still consequences, but they're minuscule in comparison to the person who's openly defying God, right? So God has to warn us because you still, it's like, oh, I didn't know that light was red, but you drove across anyway. Okay, you didn't know that, but you still might get, God still got to warn you, say, hey, watch out, right? Because you're putting yourself in danger. And so it doesn't matter that you didn't know that the light had turned red. You still drove through the intersection. Oh, I didn't know a train was coming, so I decided to sleep on the train track. Okay, but they're still so God's still warning this man, right? Doesn't matter that you didn't know. I still have to warn you that what you're doing is killing you. Now, interestingly enough, it's still their decision whether he's going to listen or not. Is he going to get up and say, I had the craziest dream, but I've already got my mind made up, right? And God warns everybody in Romans chapter 2, verse 14 through 15. God speaks to everybody. Again, God has a covenant with everybody. It's the Edenic covenant or the Noah covenant, either with everybody about how we should act. God says, I will protect you, but you got to act right. So everybody on the earth is responsible. But there's some who personally who know him. And in Romans, Paul contrasts those who know. And first he talks about the Jews who know God's will, who were given the 10 Commandments, who the prophet spoke to, and they're resisting. And then he talks about other people who didn't have the privilege of having the Bible read to them, but they still have God speaking to their consciousness. In verse 14 of Romans chapter 2, it says, for when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves. Just something in them is telling them to act right and treat people right. they're following the law, and God never gave them personally the law. They're just doing it by nature because God has built a hollow thing inside of everybody that he feels, and so you still have the essence of that. He's still, the essence of him is in everybody, and they can draw on that. It says, God in verse 15, who shows the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness. So since God's essence is in everybody, because it's like when we cut off God, whatever point in our life that we say, I'm gonna be my own God. That could be at 3 years old. Some people have 3 years old that have made it clear to the parents, I'm my own God. I'm not gonna listen to you. But at some point, whether you're at 7 years old or 12 years old, at some point, we shut God out and we decide, I'm not going to listen to my conscience. Okay, at that point, then it's like there's a block in between his spirit and ours, but his essence is still there. And if we were to listen to our hearts, whether you openly confess God or not, you still can feel him in your heart and in your conscience, the God says. And so he says, therefore, we are without excuse. It says their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. So your thoughts, either those thoughts that come at you that tell you, hey, you shouldn't do that, even though you don't know God, something tells you, and it either excuses you and you don't do it, or it accuses you because you are doing it. Everyone has a conscience, and then at certain points, people just deaden themselves to it. But they'll never be able to stand before God and say, I didn't know. Yes, you did. I told you, and you should not have done that. But something's, and you said, I'm going to do it anyway. And whether you knew it was the voice of God or not, you chose not to listen to your conscience. So this king, Abimelech, God's coming to him in a dream, but he doesn't know this God. And yet he got a choice. Am I going to listen or not? And he's arguing in his dream. But Lord, I had no idea. He said, well, now you know. What are you going to do? So Genesis chapter 20, verse 6 says, and God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. So I know you didn't know. That's why I'm telling you. It says, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. So here's what's going on, is that God sovereignly intervened. And so he's got this harem, there could be 20 wives in his harem. He's gone to each one. So I'll tell you in advance what has happened, because this didn't take place in a day. Abraham was there for, we'll probably say, at least a month or more. And so Sarah's taken into his harem, and the man is going around trying to have sexual relations with different women in his harem because he wants kids. And they're barren, they're barren, they're barren. Nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. So finally he gets to this 20th wife that he's added. I don't know if there was 20, I'm just making up that number. Could have been 50. But he gets to this new wife that he's added in, and he physically is unable to have relations with her. Right? So God's saying, I prevented you. So yeah, you didn't touch her because I sovereignly intervened. So I'm giving you the choice. Are you going to push past it? And God sovereignly intervenes in a lot of situations to prevent us from doing something. But then the choice is, are you going to push past that? Gee, I had so much trouble breaking into that house, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'll come back tomorrow night and make sure I can do it. So
we'll get better too.
Yeah, I'll just get better as opposed to, maybe I shouldn't be doing this thing. I mean, that happens to everybody. Right. And so halfway through, like a friend can give you, this is a true story I'm pulling from, but not mine, thank God. A friend can give you, hey, can I store this stuff in your garage? There's just a bunch of nice little things I've got here, and I need to store them in your garage for a while. So you go, okay. And so you didn't know they were stolen goods, but at a certain point, you start to figure out, I've been to his house and he's already got 2 TVs, but he's put 3 more TVs than there's still in the package in my garage. And that's your conscience saying, I wonder if this might be stolen goods. And at that point, once God gives you an idea and says, this could be wrong, do you push past it and say, oh, well, I didn't steal him, so I'm a kid. Now that you know that it's wrong, are you going to push past that anyway and say, oh well? And so that's what Abimelech, that's the choice he has. I'm going to push past this, or am I going to listen to what my conscience is telling him? And also, God says, I prevented you. So that would be, because I'm sure everybody might have a story where their friends invited them somewhere and, oh, I can't go. And then you found out how much trouble the friends got in, and who, I'm so glad I didn't go. And God interceded, because look, I didn't know that that's what they were going to do. And God supernaturally intervened in a situation sometimes, and prevented you from getting in trouble. So the next time when they come up to you, the question is, now that you know, what are you going to do? You're going to go with them again, or are you going to say, last time I heard what you guys ended up doing, and I don't want any part of that. So God gives us the opportunities, but when the consequences do come because we didn't listen, we can't stand before God and say, God, you didn't warn me. Yes, I did. That's why I gave you that flat tire when you were on your way to beat up that guy. But you fixed that tire and you went on anyway, and then then you see what happened.
It was AAA. They fixed
So you
it.
push past it. So a friend of mine went to get married and the church burned down, but he didn't listen. Okay, so so that's all I'm saying. You go to get married and the church burns down. Well, okay. So he said he rebuked the devil, got married anyway. And then he had to rebuke the devil several times. Okay, now, verse 7. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet. Now, I know Abraham was a prophet. Okay, so let's define what the Old Testament ministry of the prophet was about. So this is how God speaks. God speaks to his prophets. In Numbers chapter 12, verse 6, it says, hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision, and I speak to him in dreams. And those are the two major ways that God spoke to the prophet in the Old Testament, in visions and dreams. However, in Hosea chapter 12, verse 10, it says, I have also spoken by the prophets and have multiplied visions. I've given symbols through the witness of the prophets. So the prophets have a bunch of visions, because any one of us at some point in our life might have had God speak to us in a dream. He likes speaking to us in a dream because we can't argue with him. Although Abimelech's arguing in his dream, but no, he's not arguing. He's just defending himself. But so God will speak to you in a dream, but it doesn't mean every single dream that you have is from God, because some dreams are just from pizza, some dreams are just from too much chili. But you might have where God has shown you something's going to happen in advance. Okay, so we might have that experience once or twice in our life. Prophets have those all the time. Or visions. You might, wow, I just saw an angel, or I just saw, or God shows you something. You're wide awake, but God shows you something, and he's showing you what he's going to do. So if God showed it to you, it's going to happen. If you imagine it and it never happened, that doesn't mean God changed his mind. That means that was not God. But you might have a vision and see something, and wow, I just saw, those two people are going to get married. I just saw it. And sure enough, a couple of years later, they get, wow, God showed me that. That doesn't mean you're a prophet, because he says, with the prophets, I have multiplied visions. That means, so prophets, bless their heart, they have visions all the time and dreams all the time, and they can't even be around people because God's always showing them stuff about people. So that in the Old Testament, that's the ministry of the prophet. The role of the prophet, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 18, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it should be that whoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require of him. So the role of the prophet was to speak for God, right? Is that Abraham's role? No, not quite. But so that was the role of the prophet. I would speak. I'm going to give him his words, and he better speak it, and people better listen. If you don't listen, then you're in trouble. The purpose of the prophet, though, in 2 Chronicles chapter 24 says, yes, 2 Chronicles 24, verse 19, yet he sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord. And they testified against them, but they would not listen. So the purpose, God's not just giving us a news report. Whenever a prophet comes and speak, he's not just giving us information. Hey, here's the latest thing that's going to happen. Guess what's going to happen on August 3rd? It's the purpose is to bring you back to the Lord. It's not a prophet if what they're saying doesn't bring you back to the Lord. If it's just interesting information. Ooh, God showed me. well, anyway, the purpose is for us to repent so that whatever we're doing, God's giving us a warning of something that's going to happen in advance so that, again, that's the ministry of the prophet. If God shows you something in advance, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be something bad, but you're not a prophet. But if God's showing a prophet something, it's a warning. Jonah went out and warned Nineveh and blah, 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 blah. Okay, but there's the second role of the prophet in the Old Testament, and that's where Abraham comes in. That's the role of intercessor. He's supposed to pray for people. In Numbers chapter 21, verse 7, it says, "And the people came to Moses and said, 'We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us.' So Moses prayed for the people." So this is the other ministry of the prophet, is to pray for people, to be that intercessor. And so in the Old Testament, he would intercede and pray for people. In 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 19. 1 Samuel 12:19. It says, "And all the people said to Samuel, 'Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die. For we have added to all our sins the evil of asking a king for ourselves.'" So God didn't want them to have a king, but they said, "No, we want a king." And the prophet warned them, and they said, "No, we're going to have a king." So God says, "Okay, but there will be consequences." And so once they realize there are going to be consequences, they go to the prophet, or prophecies. They go to the prophet, and and said, "Please pray." And that was their other job, was to intercede once the people had sinned. In fact, in 1 Samuel 12:23, it says, moreover, as for me," this is Samuel, right? "Far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way." So I'm going to do two things. I am going to pray for you. In fact, I'll get in trouble if I stop praying for you. And sometimes when people are messing up, we get mad at them. And, "Well, Lord, I hope something bad happens to that person." And that's not supposed to be our attitude. Our attitude is hopefully they would repent. Because actually, we don't have to pray. The bad thing's coming. But we hope that we can pray so that it doesn't come, or that when it comes, that they see the error of their ways. And he says, "And I'll teach you the good way," and then we're able to teach them. So if the consequence does come, then that's a teaching opportunity. But otherwise, we want to intercede for them once they've repented, and so that the consequence doesn't come. So that's what Abraham, he says he's a prophet, and like Abraham interceded for Lot, right? When in Sodom, and he prayed to the Lord. God wants to teach us to be intercessors, so that we pray for people, that the wickedness doesn't happen to them, not that we gloat when it does. So Genesis chapter 20, second part of verse 7 says, "He's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." So the first he says, "You are dying," and now he's saying, "Dying thou shalt die," just like we said to Eve. "Dying thou shalt die." He knows. So you shall surely die. That means you shall die. That means the word happened twice. So you and all who are yours. That yes, there will be revenge, because God already had plans for Sarah. She's supposed to be the mother of a whole nation, so she can't stay here with you in Palestine and be your wife. So there'll be consequences, because God's going to have his will done. So if you just insist on it, then I have to break off pieces of your body bit by bit. So because God's not going to let his will be thwarted. We don't have to ever worry about that. So verse 8. "So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, told all these things in their hearing." Didn't slough it off, right? "Oh, that was a crazy dream. Let me go back to what I was doing." "And the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, 'What have you done to us? How have I offended you, that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to be done." In verse 10, this is very important. "Then Abimelech said to Abraham, 'What did you have in view that you have done this thing?'" He's saying, what have you seen in your life? What's happened to you that has shaped you, that this is how you respond? Now, all of us have had experiences, and our past experience shape our worldview. So Abraham had seen this sort of thing in Ur of the Chaldees, in Babylon. He had seen, probably, right, kings or sheiks or nomads come in and just kill people and take their wives. So because he had, and he may have only seen that once, who knows? But it shaped his worldview, and now he applied that everywhere he went. And a lot of us have that, some experience that we had in our as children or in our past that has created a response from us. So this is how he responds, and then you see the world this way, like I can't trust the world. Or you had the opposite experience, and some stranger came up and gave you candy. Now you run up to strangers all the time. Oh, the whole world is wonderful, because of that experience. So whatever your experiences, they do shape you. That's what he said. What have you seen? What have you viewed? What sort that makes that you come up with this particular strategy? And we're going to talk just in just a little bit why he came up with this strategy and how we can change our strategies ultimately. Because all of us have strategies, coping strategies that we have developed, right? So Abraham said, verse 11, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed, so let's just stop there. So, right, he's confirming, I had this experience, I saw this, and unless you fear God, you're going to kill me. And that makes sense that he saw that and is applying it. It makes logical sense, but God still wants to reshape our worldview so that we can see things more like he sees them and not see everything based on our past scars. So, but here's the interesting part. In verse 12 it says, but indeed, she truly is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. So here Abraham's saying, actually, my father had the oldest kid, Nahor, I think is his name, and then or Haran, Harran, and then with one wife, and then later had a different, and then because Abraham's the youngest, and then Nahor was next, and then that wife died, and then Abraham's mother is actually different than his brother's mother. So he's saying, and then he had another kid. My father had a kid with that wife, or the first wife, or Abraham's part of the first wife, and then he had the kid with the second wife. But either way, I'm not literally related by our mothers. We don't have the same mothers, and so she's like a half sister, or I don't know what you call that when it's the father. But so he's saying, so she really technically is my sister. So we weren't technically lying, but he was. So, however, some scholars think that it was his brother's child, the oldest brother that's maybe 30 or 40 years older than him, the father of Lot, that Sarah was his brother's child. So really, Sarah was his niece, just like Lot was his nephew. But they were the same age, because remember that his brother started having kids when Abraham was a baby. And so Lot and Abraham are close to the same age. And Sarah, if it's his brother's kid, would be around the same age. And that there's a tradition that sometimes the grandfather would call his kids, obviously his sons and daughters, but even his sons and daughters' kids, he'd call them, those are my sons and daughters. Like my nieces and nephews have kids, and I call them my nephews. I call my nieces and nephews my kid. I call my grandnephews. I just use the word nephews. And probably if they had kids, I would call them my nephews too. So they did the same kind of thing. They just they would say sons and daughters. For example, Abraham calls Lot his brother in Genesis chapter 13, verse 8, when they were talking about splitting up their land. It says, so Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Well, no, you're my nephew. But they would just use the same terms to describe the same thing. So in Genesis chapter 11, when Abraham's describing his situation and when we first meet Sarah, Genesis 11, verse 28 and 29, it says, Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in Ur the Chaldees. Haran, that is Abraham's brother. It says, then Abraham and Nahor took wives. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarah, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Where'd they come from? They were the daughters of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. And we think that Sarah's name might have been Iscah before she married Sarah, that they changed her name to Sarah. It seems to apply that in the text because it says that he had two kids, and Abraham married one, and his brother married the other. And one was Milcah, and the other was Iscah, who later they just changed the name to Sarah. So that's a possible reading of that. But either way, Abraham's trying to say, I didn't technically lie because she kind of is my sister, but I just didn't mention the wife part. Okay, but it's still a lie. So in in Genesis chapter 20, verse 13, it says, and it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me. In every place, wherever we go, say of me, he is my brother. So they had this strategy before they ever left to come into Canaan. Because of what Abraham had seen, they came up with this strategy. We come up with strategies how to handle situations. So you might look at the world and say, okay, whenever I get into a situation, I'm going to lie like Abraham. I'll just lie my way out of it. Or if I get into a stressful situation, I'll just become angry and bully people, or I'll close myself off, or I'll drink if it's too stressful, or I'll do this, or I'll take drugs, or we get in stressful situations, we don't know a way out, and we come up with a strategy a lot of times when you're young as how we're going to deal with that situation, and then we're still doing it later because we see the whole world that way. And it might have worked that one time, but we now apply it to everything. We think every time I'm in a situation, this is how I'm going to act. So here are some things we need to learn. So we develop strategies when we're young, and unfortunately, these strategies become our weaknesses, right? That we've chosen, this is how I'm going to handle situation, and we look at all situations the same. And we hold on to our weaknesses because when Abraham did this in Egypt, that was 25 years ago. 25 years later, he's still doing the same thing. And what does that tell us is that God was working on Abraham, but change happens on God's timetable and not on our timetable. So God was working on Abraham starting 25 years ago, and he's trying to show Abraham, you don't have to lie. I need you to ask me what to do in a situation, and I'll tell you what to do. You've got this previous strategy. You don't even consult me. So he's slowly teaching Abraham by these new experiences, so you don't have to lie. But God is the one working it out. I wish that we could just change ourselves because we could do it tomorrow. We would just say, "Ooh, I'm never going to do that again," and it would just happen like this. But God is the one that does the work in us, and it's just not in our timetable. It's just not in ours. So interesting enough, Abraham had bravery in other areas. So we all have weaknesses in some areas and strengths in some areas. Some areas we're scared and we act a certain way. In other areas, we're just phenomenal. When they kidnapped Lot, Abraham crazily went after Lot with 300 of his servants against this huge army that had just taken down 5 cities. He was crazy, but God protected him, and it worked out. So he was brave in that situation. And there, I've heard of soldiers who come back from fighting in Iraq and Iran places, and you go to give them a shot and they faint because they're scared of needles, but they can be out there with bullets, but they have a story in their head about the needle's going to kill me, but that bullet, I guess, won't really harm me. And so we all have stories where this doesn't bother us, but that does. You're incredible and you can control the nation, but you're scared of a spider. That spider's going to jump at me. And so we're just different fears and weaknesses. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. We also have very short memories. God has protected us so many times, and he does so much with us, and we forget because we only look at today. And just like remember the children of Israel when they were wandering around the wilderness, and God would deliver them from the Red Sea, and he was doing all this stuff. But that day, we're hungry, and they panic, and that's how we are every day. We forget all the mercies that God has done for us. We forget everything how he's blessed us. So we have short memories. This story also tells us that we need to have grace for other people because it takes a long time. Whatever strategies that people have come up with to survive, whatever thing that they're doing because they think, I have to do this in the situation or I'm going to die. But they don't. we see that they don't, but they can't see that they don't. They think that they have to do it. We need to have grace for people because it takes time. It's 25 years later, and Abraham's still doing the same thing, and God's not rebuking him. God's like, there's not reported anywhere where God's saying, you should have been over this by now. We rebuke each other. Why aren't you over that? It's been this amount of time. Well, God's still working. And so we can't judge. We need to have grace for people, right? So good news is God is not mad. He's not impatient. And he is devising strategies to change us. So Abraham finds himself in the same position, doing the same thing. It is understandable. And again, if I'm walking in a neighborhood and they only wear red in that neighborhood, and if you wear blue in that neighborhood, they will jump you. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna put on some red and go into that neighborhood. I'm not we don't try to test God. And if Abraham perceived this as dangerous. And if God speaks to him and says, Abraham, you don't have to lie, then he needs to listen to that. And that is what God was doing. God would come up to him to say, I'm your reward, I'm your protection, I'm your shield. He was saying you don't have to lie, but Abraham wasn't taking that in. But I want to go on the other side and says, this doesn't mean that we can be presumptuous. And if there's a sign up and says, if you wear blue in this neighborhood, we will kill you. And you say, well, I'll just wear red because God's going to protect me. You can only do that if God speaks to you. Otherwise, God expects you to use common sense. But in this case, God had spoken to Abraham. He did say, he appeared to him in visions several times to say, I'm going to protect you. I've got you. And so, but he was so programmed to go to this old strategy. And we have to God slowly reprograms us, right? So now, Genesis chapter 20, verse 14. Then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, and I'm winding down, and male and female servants, and gave them to Abraham. And he restored Sarah, his wife, to him. So different than, let me keep reading. And Abimelech said, see, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you. So Pharaoh gave Abraham a bunch of stuff and said, now get out. Thank you for coming. But Abimelech really did want an alliance with him. This Palestinian really did want to. So he says, here, you can stay. Now that I get it, here, you can have your wife back and fine. And in verse 16, it says, then to Sarah, he said, behold, I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody. And thus, now the King James says, thus she was rebuked. That's a bad translation. Thus she was judged. And in fact, the best translation would be thus she was justified. Because he says this vindicates you. And thus she was justified in front of everybody. God judged her innocent. So I'm giving to vindicate that I did not touch you because God literally prevented him. He was literally not able to have relations with her. Verse 17. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. Then they bore children. So again, in that month or so or more that Abraham was there, he had tried to have kids with everybody else and was unable to. That was God's sign that something was wrong. He should have, something's wrong, because none of these wives that I have, none of these female servants are able to bear children. Well, let me go to Sarah and I'll just try. Instead of thinking, I wonder if that means something. Maybe he said, well, I'll just try one more time. And so that's when God literally prevented him from completing any sort of sexual act with her. But once Abraham prayed for him, God healed everybody. And verse 18 says, for the Lord, and this time he uses Jehovah, had closed up all the wounds of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. And so he's saying because of their Jehovah relationship, that's why he uses the word Jehovah instead of Elohim. Because of this Jehovah relationship, God had protected her and closed up all the wounds of everyone there so that he would get the hint that something was wrong and not complete the act. And so because of their covenant, God went before her and had already protected her. And that's what God does with us. We have a covenant with him. That's the good news. We have a covenant, and God protects us. And yes, everyone on earth has a covenant with God, but we have a special covenant through Christ. and the Jews have a special covenant through Abraham. And so he will go before us. He will prepare a way. That's the good news. But when he comes to warn us, we have to listen because there are consequences that come whether you know it or not. When God pricks our consciousness, we've got to listen because what he's doing is he's saving us from danger. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Those of you who go to Good Shepherd, then you know that Pastor Grimm was in the hospital recently and is probably not going to be speaking today, but I think Rodney might. We'll see on the other line. But there's plenty of wonderful people. If Rodney doesn't, if Rodney does, you need to listen because he's so good. But if he doesn't, there's plenty of fantastic people online that you can listen to. And for everyone, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll talk again on Wednesday. All right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.